Hello everyone and welcome back to Mariana Mass Books. My name is Mariana and today I am sharing with you a super interesting and fun discussion that I had with my friend Elle from Things about body reading. Elle and I have been body reading for years now. We have body read 22 books together. So after 22 books, we have a lot of thoughts about body reading, different types of body reading, different types of books to body read, different experiences body reading. So we are discussing a lot of topics about body reading. The video is of course time stamped so you can jump around at the different topics that we discuss. The excuse for this discussion, or the reason why we started talking about this discussion, was that we finished a super long 16 book series long body read, which was a very fun and interesting experience. So originally we were going to talk about that 16 book body read, but in the end we ended up talking more generally about body reading, which I guess will appeal to other people who body read in general. Without further ado, I leave you with Elle and me talking about body reading.
And the first question that we said to talk about was how we started body reading. So that could either be how we started body reading or how we started body reading in general.
So
Both can be interesting.
my first buddy read, it was actually with you. I hadn't done it before us. Yeah. So this was the first time, and I remember you didn't have a channel at that point, and mine was relatively new, and I had done a video on, I think, like fantasy books I wanted to read, and then you commented and like named a few that you would potentially want to do a buddy read on, and that's how we started chatting about it. So I actually, if I'm recalling correctly, Lord of the Rings was my first buddy read I had ever done.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I remember because I wanted to reread The Lord of the Rings. That I hadn't read since I was like 12, and you had never read it, and so I thought, oh, it would be interesting, and I commented on your channel. It's funny because I feel like in real life, I mean, in real life and everywhere, I'm a very introverted person. Like that's a part of who I am, and I am not very like I participate a ton when it comes to school or work. If I don't know, since I was younger, like if the teacher would say who wants some extra credit or who wants to participate in this project, or there's this event that's going to be like who wants to work, I would always be like, yes, I want to do it, but within school or work context. But in social context, that is not like within this environment of school or work. I'm not one to volunteer to participate for social stuff. If like I'll only go to a party with people I know, that type of thing. But online I am very like, yes, I want to do this, I want to do that. And so I think I didn't remember that I didn't have my channel yet. I mean, my channel has like 2 or 3 years at the most. I don't remember exactly, so it's not a long time. But I do remember, like, since I first started watching booktube, people would talk about their body reads, and I FOMO person. And so I was like, I want to do this thing. Everyone's doing this thing. And so I started just like commenting. I mean, it sounds like I just started commenting on people's channels like, hey, do you want to? No, not precisely. But channels that I watched, a lot of videos that I knew the person who comments when they would propose if the first time that I did it was for a reading event that was in translation, and the booktuber that I watched, she was reading a book, Colombian author, in English, and I was also interested in that book, but I was going to read it in Spanish. And so I wrote to her and I told her, hey, it would be interesting if we both read it. And so we could compare the experience of you reading in English and I reading in Spanish. And it ended up being really fascinating because there were a lot of cultural stuff that she would miss, that I would tell her, like background stuff that you just get if you're from a Latin American country. And so it was a very interesting experience. So I think when I saw that you wanted to read The Lord of the Rings, it was a similar kind of thing where I thought it would be interesting to compare experiences, having already read it with someone who has never read it. And I think it was an interesting experience.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think like the concept of buddy reading was always intriguing to me too, because like booktubers talk about doing buddy reads. But like you said, I've never been one in social situations to be like, sorry, I'm hearing things in the background here. I've never been one to like just volunteer into doing something like that. So when you offered it, I was like, oh, this is going to be really exciting because it's going to be like my first foray into doing it. And now we're like, 2.5, maybe more years down the road from the first time we read together.
Yeah. Which would be a nice segue, I think. We have in the list to talk about the other books that we have read. So the first book that we read was The Lord of the Rings, and we did all three. We can call it a trilogy, a book, like strictly speaking, it's a book, whatever. That's not, we're not going to get into that, but we read all three, right? And we then repeated more bodies.
Yeah, I think then we read the Talia Hibbert series.
Yeah.
I can't think the Chloe, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and then Danny and
Brown sisters.
the Brown sisters. Yeah. And we did that one really quick. I think each book we read in like a week, and we just did 3 weeks straight because romances are pretty
super
fast
quick
paced.
Yeah.
And I think I remember because I was on a work trip for at least one of the books. And I remember we were just like reading it really quickly. And it was a completely different experience because we were like sending things back and forth like almost daily with that one. Because we were just doing it so quickly, as opposed to like The Lord of the Rings. I think we took like maybe about a month per book. Because I think each book has 2 parts, and I think we read each part in 2 weeks. And then with the one that we went on to do, Realm of the Elderling, took us a year and change to get through all those, which is actually pretty fast when you think about how big those books are.
It is. So just for context, the Realm of the Elderlings has 16 books, if anyone is watching and doesn't know. And it's divided into separate series. And I have seen people who read one series per year or something like that. And I think we both entered that experience with, okay, we'll read the first trilogy and see if we like it. And then if we like it, then we can continue. And I think both of us, very early on in book 1, we were both like, oh yeah, we're going to want to read those 16 books. And so we read I think, except for the Brown Sisters, which is romance, shorter, fast-paced, easy to read, that we did in 1 month, that I think it was kind of like a February theme type thing. Except for that, we have mostly kept the 1 month per book pacing.
Yep.
In average, mostly we kept that. So that first trilogy we read over 3 months, and we gave each other like a break. We were like, yeah, we'll continue, but we both read a lot of things and a lot of things at the same time. We're, everyone everyone in booktube understands the 1000 book TBR. So we were like, okay, yeah, we're going to take some time off for reading other stuff, and then we'll read the next trilogy, and then we'll see.
And then we didn't stop. And then it
Yeah.
was just like, because I'm the one who will set up the buddy read timing. So with each of our buddy reads, I've gotten out the book, like cut it up into pieces, and then we'll send the list out. And each time I was like, it's like we're ending one book or ending one series, but also talking about, so we're going to start the next one soon. And sometimes it was back to back, and sometimes we maybe took like a week off between. But yeah, we kind of just jumped right in from book to book.
Yeah. Which is another point that I wanted to talk about, was that of like how we go about body reading, and like the style or the structure that we do. And because it's interesting, because I think when I first body read with someone, for me it was pretty, like I never imagined a different way of reading a book with someone other than creating a schedule and checking in based on that schedule. Like that was pretty straightforward to me, that's how one would go about reading a book with someone. Kind of like a book club, except a book club, you're like, okay, we're going to read this month and then talk about it. So it's not as divided, the calendar, but it is a calendar where you say it's this month, and then at the end we'll talk about it. And so the first body read that I did the calendar and I sent it, and she was like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. And it was this 1 week, then Sunday check-in thing, and we both kept the pacing, and it was very good. It was very interesting. And then I did another one where the other person, we had the calendar and then like 2 days into the book, she was like, oh, I finished. And I was like chapter 2 or something, following the calendar. And that was like a bit, because then I tried to hurry up to match her pacing. So I was hurrying up and she was waiting for me. And we like it wasn't as compatible in terms of pacing. And I think something I really like about our body reads is our weekly check-ins allow us to go in depth into several themes of the book, or character moments, or something in the writing that means something. And sometimes when the particular week had a lot of stuff happening in the book, will even talk between the week about like the details. Whereas that didn't allow us for going really in detail for more more detailed discussion. And then I have never done it like that, but I've heard other people say that they don't have a calendar or anything. They're just like, we'll read this, and then they comment whenever. Which my mind doesn't wrap around that, because I'm more of a structured person.
Yeah.
For some things, but that's not what this is either. But for this, I do think that structure works best. So usually what we do is that we start the book, we decide, okay, how many pages, how long, how much can we read? Will we do it in a month, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, depending on number of pages? And then you create a week per week calendar depending on the number of weeks. And then we do like usually we'll do a Sunday check-in. Well, for me it works great because I don't enjoy doing the calendar. So
Yeah, and
for me it was good that you send me the calendar, because I'm like, okay, yeah, like if you send it, I can follow it,
yeah, and
but
I
I
don't
don't
mind.
enjoy it.
And I don't mind making it at all. One thing I like is that, you know, we picked Sundays as our check-in day with the Lord of the Rings, and then that's just our
Okay.
check-in day now.
Yeah.
Whenever we do a buddy read, with like, you know, some exceptions, like sometimes we'll message each other and be like, hey, I finished the reading, or I'm gonna finish the reading on Monday, and we just like let each other know if we're behind. um, or, you know, sometimes if you're a little bit ahead, one of us will check in early. But one thing that I like about the buddy reading experience that we have is, even though we're not talking over something like this where we're actually chatting back and forth and we're leaving each other messages on Voxer, it still ends up feeling like a conversation, because one of us will check in and then the other person will do a response, and then more often than not that the first person responds again, and we might kind of go back and forth a little bit more as we kind of
Mhm.
talk through things in greater detail, or something one of us said like makes us think of something else, or we're like going down one of our rabbit hole theories that we have about the book. And that is like not quite the same experience that I've had in everybody read that I've ever done. Sometimes it's just like one of us says something and then the other responds, and then it's done for the week. And there's not really like more of a conversation going on. It's just like we kind of tell each other what we thought.
Mhm.
And it's still like a good experience. It's just like less interactive. And I like that
Mhm.
we will keep bouncing back and forth. And, you know, we do really long check-ins a lot of the time, and I think it's funny because as time got well, at the beginning, what we would be like, start I'm going to try to keep it short this time as we're talking, and now I don't even think we say that as much, like we or we'll say it, and I think we both know that's not true.
Yeah.
Our check-ins will be sometimes upwards of like 30 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's fun
It
because we
feels
have so much to talk about. Yeah.
exactly, and it's good because Boxer has the 15-minute limit, so it feels like you're not sending a 45-minute check-in. But if you add up the 15-minute segments, it's like, oh, I'm always like, I hope that Elle listens to this like on her way to work or something, because that's so long. Or like folding laundry, like a podcast or something, because it's so long. Um, but yeah, I agree. Like that conversation really is something that really works, and I feel like also, not only the pacing but the book choices have really favored that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because even for instance, like the Brown Sisters trilogy, I didn't like that. Wasn't a memorable experience, not only because of the books that we were all, I think we both were like, yeah, they were fine, but they were not groundbreaking. Not only because of that, but also because that type of body read is more of a I like this, I didn't like this type of thing, and it doesn't have so much to further talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And both the Lord of the Rings and the Realm of the Elderlings have a good balance of both, because they are fantasy, and I'm not saying like fantasy is the only thing that does this, but it has character moments So it has this potential to be, oh my gosh, I love this character or I hate this character. But it also has, you know, the world building or whatever it is, which again is not exclusive to fantasy. You have a video where you talk about how world building is not exclusive to fantasy. But then it does have this element of, oh my god, I really like this, I don't like this, I'm in love with this, I'm not in love with this. But they also have really great themes that you can go into, and so that lends itself to even more conversation, where we will, like, we'll even go to stuff about our lives, where I'll say, oh, this reminded me of this thing in my personality or in my life or in my work or whatever, and you will do the same thing, like from big things, you know, therapy style things, to even more mundane things, or like you know, your tattoos or my habits or whatever, which is I think very, very interesting. And it just lends itself to a good conversation. And through time we have body read, you did the count, we have body read 22 books together. And so I feel like we know each other, what we like, what we don't like. We'll be reading and I'll think, oh, Elle is going to like this part, or I can't wait to hear what Elle has to think about this specific section, because we kind of are attuned to the other, and there is, I think, an element of compatibility, that
Mhm.
that is just, I think, a casual thing. I don't think that's something that you can plan, or that you or that we could know when we first started, because as you said, like, I didn't even have a channel, your channel was relatively new. It was like a gamble of like, hey, would you maybe want to do this? And it just ended up working in terms of what we like, what we don't like, where we don't, you know, it doesn't mean that we agree with everything, but we do have a good compatibility in how we think of what we are reading, um, which would lead to something that you had mentioned that you wanted to talk about um, the difference of opinion when we read and how that affects the experience.
Yeah, I think that we end up, like you're saying, being really compatible with a lot of our reading, and sometimes it's like for different reasons. Like we are both like motivated by like we're both character readers, but in different ways. Not all the time, you know. Sometimes we end up falling in love with the same characters, like when we were reading, you know, Farsi or Trilogy, and we're like, protect Verity at all cost, you know, like we have like those same characters that we get attached to. But I think we get motivated to kind of read in different ways. And I think that one of the elements where we have had differences is in opinions about specific characters. And I can think of it in the non-fit series, and I won't
Yeah.
be I'll be doing everything in my power not to spoil anything. But Althea, when Althea first gets introduced as a character,
Yeah.
we had a difference of opinion. And then oh, why can't I think of her name? The female lead in Rainwild Chronicles.
Alice.
Yeah,
Alice
Elise. We had a difference of
and
opinion with her.
Cedric.
Yes, yes, and in Cedric. And it was never it was we always kind of like acknowledged each other's differences in our opinions, and sometimes they would end up like coming together, and then sometimes they maybe didn't, but I think some of it was like the character growth got us to the same spot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of wonder, like in kind of those kind of instances, you know, I think me liking the character of Althea and like you not being as big of a fan of her as at the beginning, like did my interpretations of her or my like excitement towards her as a character kind of like change the way you thought of her, or do you think it was just like her as a character changing that kind of changed your thoughts on her?
I think mostly it's like her as a character, because I feel like when it comes to characters, yeah, I guess that would be the difference. So I think it depends on why you don't like a character. Because if it's something personal, that sometimes you will see something reflected either of yourself or of someone or a certain type of person in your life. And when it's that personal, I think that it doesn't really affect, because you are seeing it from this perspective of a personal thing. But when it's something about maybe how you are interpreting the text, then there will be moments when you think, oh, yeah, actually, like I hadn't thought about it. Again, no spoilers, but in the last trilogy, I can think of a specific character that we were kind of like unsure about. But I feel like you really actively didn't like him, and I was more like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I feel like I didn't actually. It was neither here nor there, and it wasn't until you pointed out that I was like, oh yeah, that's true. Like, this doesn't make sense, or this is not really justified. And that type of thing. There's a book where I talk about all the time in our check-ins, because he's a fan of the realm of the Elderlings, so I have seen a lot of his videos. And he says that I'm not going to quote him, because I'll get it the other way around, but he says that it's more likely that when he doesn't like something, no, that is the other way around. When he likes something and someone points something out about the negative side, he will be like, huh, I hadn't thought about it. But that there is never going to be an instant where he loves something and he is like, oh my God, Robin Hobb, favorite author. And then someone says, but, so and so. And that he'll be like, you are right. I don't like her writing. That doesn't happen. So I guess that's like, there is a difference of if it's convincing you that you like them or that you don't, and why the reason is that you like them or that you don't. Because that can really affect, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that because like I've had buddy reading experiences where we both like just disliked the book. And it became like I can think of one example. I was reading with Gina at Gina Stainer, and we were reading The Priory of the Orange
Yeah, I
Tree.
was going to say, I remember you both mentioning that.
And we were just, I think that if we had read it separately, we probably wouldn't have really liked it, but I don't think we would have like really actively disliked it in the same way, because one of us would point out a flaw and then the other one would be like, yeah, that was a flaw, and then
Yeah.
this flaw, and then the other would be like, yeah, and then this flaw. And it was like this devolving into like, yeah, that was a really bad book. Whereas if I had read it alone, I either would have DNF'd it because I knew fairly early on I wasn't gonna really like get along with it, but we were both like giving it a chance because it was a buddy read, or I would have just like kind of taken it in as like kind of like a popcorn read, I guess, where you're just like,
Yeah.
okay, accepting it at face value. But when you do a
Yeah.
buddy read, generally speaking, at least for me, I'm reading a little bit more deeper than I would be. I'm taking notes, which I don't do on my own, or like jotting things down, like a word or something that'll like remind me of what I want to talk about, because you want the buddy read to be interesting, you want to be able to have things to chat about.
Mhm.
So I read a little bit more deeply into things, and so I'm going to be, I think, even in a buddy read, a little bit more maybe not critical, but I'm going to see the
Analytical.
problems.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm going to see the problems a little bit more than I would if I was just like, all right, I'm going to turn off my brain. I'm just going to accept this for what it is. And I'm just going to like read it for the fun plot, even if it has plot
Mhm.
holes, even if it isn't really well developed and all of that.
Yeah. 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 I think there's an element to that with, for instance, I actually haven't read a lot of romance lately, but the first year I was on YouTube, booktube, I was reading so much romance, and there is some specific style of Kindle Unlimited romance that is not good, but that I love. And I feel like, no, there is an element of also considering the other person's opinion, which I guess we can delve a little bit more, talking about the interactive nature that you also wanted to talk about and what that does for the reading. And so you are
Mhm.
considering also the other person's opinion. And so sometimes when I'm reading those kinds of books, where maybe even like guilty pleasure books or stuff you read as a palate cleanser, or just to like it's fun, but you're not thinking too much into it, it's like, yeah, you can enjoy it. But if you're considering the other person's opinion, then you would be like, okay, this is not good. Because yeah, you're reading it differently. And I don't know if that is a segue or not, but into that, what you were saying, that you wanted to talk about the interactive nature of the reading experience. And I think we talked a bit about it in the conversation,
Yeah.
but like,
Yeah. It like, so for me, the experience of reading it is different than when I read just a book just for fun. I rarely vlog books, but if I vlog, it's kind of like a deeper read. And I think part of that reason is that you're not just interacting with the book when you're actually reading it, you're
mm,
also interacting with it when you're thinking about the things that you want to talk about, and then as you're kind of engaging with each other. So whereas with a lot of books that I read the book, when I put it down, I'm not really thinking about it that much. Or if it's a book I'm really interested in, I'll be thinking about it, but it's more of like thinking about wanting to pick it up instead of actually thinking about the book itself.
mm,
um, so when I'm buddy reading, I'm thinking about the book more. I'm thinking about the things that I want to talk about. And so the time that I'm actually considering the book is so much bigger than the actual time that I would be considering any other book that I read. Because then there's the interaction of it, you give me your check-in and you talk about the book, and like you remind me of things that I hadn't thought of, or bring up a point that I hadn't considered before, like when you were just in our last check-in, when you were talking about the magic system being a like a sense, like
mhm.
that thought is now going to be in like my head canon for the books. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, that makes perfect sense, but it's not something I would have considered on my own, or I might not have come to that thought by myself. And when you watch booktube and you're like listening to someone do a review, it's only like so deep into the experience because they're just, you're not going into spoilers, you're not going into the nitty gritty most of the time, unless it's like, a live or someone's doing a spoilery review or a spoilery blog.
Mm-hmm.
But then here it's like I'm getting more and more considerations, and so yeah, just the time that I end up spending like engaging with the actual content of the book ends up being so much bigger than the time I would ever give a book that I'm reading by myself.
Yeah.
And I think it just does like so much more to the experience and ends up making that reading experience like seated deeper into myself, and I remember
Mm-hmm.
it more often, and I will like, even if it's a bad book, I end up like thinking about it more or remembering more about it.
I think that's something that we differ in that I have always been like that with books, where I mean, obviously not every book, but if it's a book like this that does have the potential of seeing themes or analyzing stuff or falling in love with characters, I am a person who gets obsessed with it. I not just books, but in general, like I get obsessed with a specific thing and I just go all in. And I've always been like that. And with books and with shows and in general fictional characters, I have always been this like I think I've talked about it, that I mean I close the book and I never close the book. The book stays with me, so I will be thinking about Fitz or about the Fool or about any other character in the realm of the Elderlings. There is a booktuber that I started following just based on his review of Assassin's Apprentice, because he was talking about how he was so engaged with the story that he would be, I don't know, watching TV and he would think, I wonder what Fitz is up to. And so he would pick back the book. And I'm very much like that, where I'm like, I wonder what Fitz is doing right now. I like these are fictional characters, but for me they always just become real people. I went through an Outlander phase. But I had an account specifically for Outlander, and I would talk about it all the time because of the characters, and I would and that's something that I would joke about. It's like, what are you thinking? Outlander, always Outlander. And I'm out of my Outlander phase. But I'm now in my realm of the Elderlings phase, and so everything that I see in real life reminds me of something of the book I'm reading. For my mom, I think me having a channel has been good, because now instead of talking to her about the book I'm reading for 23 hours of the day, it's only 22, uh so I've always been like that, so that hasn't changed. But what has changed is that you said, of this thing where someone will mention something and it will become part of, as you said, as your headcanon, or as something that makes sense, and you incorporate that into how you view the work. Talking about booktube, I do think that we could use more spoiler content in booktube, mostly because of just because of this type of in-depth conversation about a piece of work, fiction, non-fiction, whatever it is. The videos I most enjoy are the 1 hour videos that just go in depth about a book. it's funny because when we talk, I'll constantly reference, oh, I've seen this live show where they said this and this, and I saw this other live show, because I love watching long form content that goes in detail about the stuff that I like. And not to get too like, oh, the algorithm is ruining our lives. But I do think there's a certain element of people talking about how certain type of content does better for the algorithm, and spoiler content is not that, because if it won't get as many views, because if someone hasn't read that book, they won't watch that video. But to me, I think I really love engaging with that, even if it's like a 2-year-old video that you find on a book that you read, and you can still engage. You have talked about how people still comment on your Lord of the Rings vlog, and that's what I like. I think the conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that after you were done talking about it, because it is kind of funny, because the Lord of the Rings was my first buddy read, and it was also the first time I tried to do like a spoilery vlog. So I was like talking about like my immediate thoughts and like things I was thinking about as I was vlogging it, and then we would have like more of like an in-depth conversation around like what was happening, the themes, like the characters and that type of stuff. And those are my the videos that have done the best over time on my channel. They have the highest number of views. It's Lord of the Rings, so
Yeah,
it has
yeah.
a big fandom of people. Um, and like this is going more into a conversation around fandoms, but it was probably one of the best things to do a spoilery review on, because I
Yeah.
enjoyed the experience. Like Lord of the Rings is not my favorite fantasy series, but kind of seeing the place where so much of our fantasy comes from was like a really
Mm-hmm.
interesting experience. Talking to you about it as you'd already read it, and doing the buddy read was really interesting. And then like just like the really positive commentary I get on those channels, where people will correct me about things because it was my first time reading and I was just kind of
Yeah.
spitballing and saying things, but always correcting or interpreting in a really like pleasant and nice manner. um which I'm a little behind on comments on that video right now, but I'll still respond to the comments. Like I'm like, I don't remember the book that well at this point. That was over 2
Yeah,
years
yeah, yeah.
ago. But yeah, I still engage with like the comments on it, because it's like people end up saying that they really love watching that type of content. And I think it's for the same
Yeah.
reason that you do, like really getting to see someone experience something. And I think a lot of it too is like watching someone um like watching someone experience something for the first time that you love, because that's the thing that I think a lot of booktubers will like talk
Mhm.
about in videos and stuff. It's like, what book do you wish you could experience for the first time all over again?
Yeah.
And you get to like live vicariously through someone as they have that experience, and that's really exciting to do.
Yeah, yeah. I watch a lot of reaction channels, and it's so fun because you're watching someone watch something that you love. It's a weird concept. When I explain people what reaction videos are, it's like, okay. But I think it's great because you can engage with the content again. You can like experience it with someone else. You can for me it's all like about re-experiencing the joy of something.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that's like a fun thing for body reads and booktube, and that, and as you say, like this maybe is devolving into like a conversation about other stuff and other topics, and not necessarily just body reads. um and speaking about like 1 hour long videos, I think we've been talking for 1 hour about body reading. um so I think maybe we could leave this conversation here, and then stop it because I also get nervous that if the internet fails, we've been talking for 1 hour and I don't want this to not save.
I do have one more thing I want to just
Oh yeah,
quickly
yeah,
bring
yeah.
up.
Go ahead. Go
So
ahead.
when we were talking about like we end up talking about each other's lives and stuff as we talk about characters or the reading experience. We ended up having like I feel like a pretty long conversation about Elise and being a scholar and what being a scholar
Yeah.
means, which led into us talking about languages. And like we had this whole conversation around that. And you had talked about like your sister like knowing a lot of languages and like enjoying learning languages. And that conversation, because for years I've thought about how I only know English, and it's common in the US to only know English, but in a lot of the world that's very uncommon. I mean, we're talking right now and you're talking in your
Yeah.
second language. And I was like, I've always like been like you should learn a language, and then being like, "Oh, well, like the effort and blah blah blah."
Someday. Yeah.
And I'm slowly but consistently attempting to learn Spanish. Don't try to talk to me in Spanish.
I won't. Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, but it's been the most consistent I've ever attempted it, and it kind of it spawned from that conversation. Like I don't think if we had not had that conversation, I probably wouldn't have like made the decision to try to
No,
actively learn a language. So that was just
definitely.
a way that our buddy read ended up being about things other than buddy reading,
Yeah.
and then ended up actually like changing something I was doing in my personal life. So I wanted to add that tidbit in because it was kind of fun.
That's
And I
so
don't think I
cool.
mentioned to you that that was kind of what inspired me to
No,
to
yeah,
try to
you've
learn
talked just
Spanish.
about your learning, but you hadn't talked about why. That's so cool. Eventually, eventually, we can talk in Spanish.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope this was an interesting conversation. We had a lot of fun doing it. We ended up talking for like, I don't know, 2 hours more after that, something like that. So, thank you for giving us the excuse to have a fun chat. That would be it for today. I will see you soonish with another bookish video. Hopefully, at least next Sunday, maybe before, I don't know. I had been sick last week, which is why I hadn't been able to film and there was no video last Sunday. So, at least hopefully next Sunday and maybe another one before. I will see you soon with another video. In the meantime, I wish you happy reading.